Hey folks, how's it going? Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another one of our weekly Bofuri discussion videos, and today we're here to talk all about episode 6, but before we get into the video proper, I do, as always, want to give a big thank you to those of you who shared last week's video over on Twitter. At BubbaLubber, at Matt87Eagle, at Sirius8752, at Clear Chicken, and at DragonKidTV. Thank you all so much for sharing last week's video over on Twitter, and if you too would like to have your name shouted out in next week's Bofuri video, then be sure to share this video around on the internet, and then tag me at JoJo Talks Too Much over on Twitter, and I will be sure to shout your name out in next week's video. Now then, with that said, there are really just two things that we gotta talk about in regards to this week's episode, the first of which being the blending of the two worlds, reality and New World Online, as well as the formation of Maple Tree, the first, or not the first, but the guild that Maple and Sally eventually form in the midst of this episode. But before we get into that, I do want to talk a little bit about the blending of the two worlds, since I feel like this sort of raises a lot of interesting questions. Now, when I say the blending of the two worlds, I don't necessarily mean that New World Online is suddenly morphing into the real world. It's nothing like that. It's just that Maple is starting to have a little bit of difficulty separating reality from fiction. She does things in this week's like the beginning of this week's episode, where she is in class and she's sleeping and somebody wakes her up and she's like, "Oh, is it my turn to watch for attacks?" And then everyone in class looks at her and bursts out laughing. Or they're playing dodgeball and Maple raises up her hand and calls for her shield, but it doesn't come because obviously they're playing dodgeball in real life. And so she gets pegged in the face. And she's just like, yeah, you know what? I think it might be a good idea to take a wee bit of a break. And I don't blame them. They do establish that after the events of the second event, it was a full week, right? They spent a full week of in-game time in this event. And it was just a day in real life, but it felt like a week. So for Maple, it would be really difficult to separate that, especially given that we know that she is experiencing this sort of VR gaming for the first time with New World Online. Sally's used to this. She tells Maple, like, hey, be sure to be on your best behavior because you're probably going to start to say and do things during class that might make you feel foolish because you're going to start to blend reality a little bit, so maybe be on the lookout for that. It led to a genuinely really funny comedic bit, but I also thought it was kind of interesting and raised a lot of really interesting questions. Questions that we've seen from other VR game anime in the past, such as Sword Art Online, which of course was probably going to get brought up. The Sword Art correlation is interesting though, because as I said, the questions that this sort of raises, while it's more so played up for laughs, it did have me wondering, like, well, arguably, what is the difference? Like, we know that New World Online is a game, and it's very much not real, it's not reality, but, you know, what is reality? If you go by science and your mind, what your mind tells you, then reality is nothing more than electrical impulses sent to your brain. Thank you, Morpheus from The Matrix. But Morpheus is right. Technically, real is just what you can see, like just what you can see, touch, and smell. Stuff like that. Like stuff that your senses tell you, like, if I'm touching this desk right now, this desk is real. But how do I know it's real? Because I'm touching it. But that touch is just electrical impulses going to your brain. So technically, and I really mean technically, you can make the argument that New World Online is just as real as reality, at least for those who choose to accept it as their reality. It would raise some interesting questions, is all I'm saying. The future of VR games, if they ever look anything similar to New World Online, which I really hope they do, would actually bring up some kind of deep philosophical questions about humanity, reality, the difference between fiction and the real world, stuff like that. I almost wonder if you would have a sort of Ready Player One type of situation where reality just becomes boring by comparison. But I don't know. I do think it's interesting. I think reality will always be the main hub, right? But like that idea of virtual worlds to escape to could be like a new pastime. You could see like actual stores being set up inside New World Online and then selling those items for real currency outside of New World Online. You see that in actual MMOs, actual MMOs. So it's not that far of a stretch. I do think that there's a lot of interesting questions raised by this comedy bit at the beginning, and I felt like I really wanted to address them straight up because, yeah, like I kind of agree with Maple, especially after spending a week in game. I can't really fault Maple for starting to blend those two worlds together. It's a really honest and genuine kind of mistake, and it was funny. Like, it was cute, especially when that dude bumps into her, because I'm thinking like, dude, watch where you're going. Like when he bumps into Maple, or I shouldn't say Maple, I guess Kaide, but I don't want to say two different names when I'm referring to the same character, so I'm just gonna say Maple. But when he bumps into Maple and she turns around, she's like ready to attack because she's used to enemies hitting her, right? So she's like, what for again? And then Sally, you know what I mean, Sally like gives her this look of like, what are you doing? And she's like, oh, no, I didn't mean it like that, I just, you surprised me, her, everything's cool, we're all fine here, how are you? Maple becomes Han Solo, I guess, I don't know. I thought it was really funny, and again, it just raised some interesting questions, and I kind of wanted to pass those questions along to you. The other interesting thing that I felt worth talking about in regards to this week's episode, even though, again, it's not a very eventful episode, stuff happens, and there's some important stuff that happens, one really important thing that happens, but that's not to say that it's like this really like constantly like, oh man, crazy stuff's happening. It's not really that kind of episode. There is a really big action scene in towards the end of the episode, and it's a rematch with the first level boss, the big cool looking deer thing. But for the most part, this episode is really just about Maple Tree being formed, Maple Tree being what Maple decides the guild will be called. And I have to point out just right away that the guild house is beautiful. It's so pretty. And I have to give my kudos to the art director, Yuki Shinjo, for the fantastic work on the exterior and the interior, but mostly the exterior of the guild's new home, because it is stunning to look at. It gave me vibes of the Kokiri from Legend of Zelda mixed with the hobbits from Lord of the Rings, like that sort of home where, like, with the Kokiri, they have their homes in these like tree stump looking things, whereas the hobbits have their homes inside of hills, right? They call them hobbit holes or burrows, and they really did this home that the guild has decided to claim truly feels like a mix between these two I guess fictional races. And it just, because you have the element of the forest with the Kokiri side of it, where it is a guild made out of a tree, but you also get that hobbit sensibility to it, where it feels very earthy, feels very homey, feels very warm and inviting, and it has that sort of comfortability to it that I really, really loved. And I just thought that the tree itself was just beautiful. I love the guild's home. I think it's fantastic. And Maple becoming the guild leader feels totally appropriate to me. It's Maple's story, the whole show is, but at the same time, it's also Maple's, because of what Maple has done, that these characters have come together. Like, Sally wouldn't know any of these people. Like, Sally would have maybe come across Kasumi at best, and maybe Kanade. But for the most part, like, people like Kuromu, people like Iz, like, they would not have stumbled across them. The new characters, Mai and Yui, that is 100% Maple. Sally probably wouldn't have looked twice at Mai and Yui, and she probably wouldn't have properly stumbled across Iz and Kuromu. Maybe Iz at like, if you stretch it, like maybe she would have went to Iz's shop, but it was Maple who like found or brought Sally to Iz. So I do feel like it's Maple's responsibility to be the guild leader, because she's the one who brought these people together. And she really does sort of attract these types of people, just these odd players that shouldn't really work but do because they have each other. And I think that's really interesting, and I like that element of Maple Tree, this group of players who on their own might not really work all that well unless you're Maple, but as a unit, they're fantastic, and they excel and they improve in each other's areas where they're lacking. And I really, really dig that. That's how a guild should be. And I think that Maple at the center of it is great. And I think that Maple scouting Mai and Yui, is so appropriate to her character, because she's not really about being the top guild. She's just about having fun with people who she can call her friends. And that's the vibe you get from Maple Tree as a guild, and I really, really dug that. Likewise, I like that we also get to see the guild stretching its wings a bit and separating the group. And it's funny because in separating the group, you actually strengthen them as a unit. Maple Tree feels less like Maple and her friends and more like an actual guild, as we see Maple actually split from Sally, and we see Iz split from Chromu, and go off with Kanade into this mine. And we see that Kanade is able to have this, like, the cube that he has. It actually, and yes, I misgendered Kanade the other day, so apologies for that. But Kanade's cube, he's able to use it to, like, gain one special skill, and it's a different skill every day. So it's like a slot machine almost. And it's just like a random lottery that he'll get this one skill each day. So I thought that was really cool, and it shows that the difference between, or not the difference, but it shows the flexibility of Maple Tree, that they don't have to be with their typical partner. Iz doesn't have to be with Kuromu. Maple doesn't have to be with Sally, and the same thing goes in reverse. Sally ends up teaming with Kasumi and Kuromu to take on a couple of mobs so that they can, I guess, raise their level. I'm not super sure what they were doing. But I did like it because it showed the ability of the group to split off into different and unusual pairings, but have it still work out, because that's how the team is going to grow. That's how they're going to become close to each other, is by splitting off, forming new friendships and new dynamics, and strengthening the bond that Maple Tree is hoping to form. And I really, really dug that. And yes, because people were so upset with me last week for not pointing it out, Syrup is adorable. I love Syrup the floating turtle. I didn't think it needed to be said, because I thought it was obvious. Syrup is the best. And on that note, everybody, I'm going to wrap up my thoughts on this week's episode here. I would say that this episode was like, it was like a chamomile tea. It wasn't quite as action-packed. We did get the final boss fight, but it was sort of something we've seen before. This was just sort of a comfort episode. This was a nice, relaxing episode. The comfiness of the Maple Tree Guild home, it just made me feel all cozy inside. Seeing the gang get together just made me feel all warm and fuzzy, so I would say this was like a chamomile tea. And with that said, that is a wrap on today's video, so I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, then go ahead and hit that like button, maybe even consider sharing the video around on the internet, and go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you want to stick around and see more content from me. And if you do, be sure to click on that bell icon so that you'll know immediately when a new video of mine comes out. And if you want to go above and beyond, then consider checking out our Teespring store and grabbing yourself a mug, or checking out our Patreon page, which really helps support the channel. And speaking of our Patreon page, I want to give a big thank you to those of you who support the channel over on Patreon. Andrew W., Calvin A., Crowbar of Irony, Daniel G., Digger the Fox, Emily, Ionos, Urza, Ginkotaku, Godzilla Fan, No For Nothing, Maria Teresa, Marshall B., Mirth Mouser, Cell, Shadow Creative, Stephen G., Sakochi, Tristan G., and Veridin. A huge thank you to all of you who support this channel over on Patreon, and if you too would like to join the T Squadron, then be sure to check out the link in the description to check out our Patreon page and get access to our Patreon exclusive Discord for as little as $1 a month. And with all that said, I want to once again thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have an awesome day, and if you are feeling stressed out today, then you go have yourself a warm cup of tea, and I will talk to you all again real soon.